I'm going to tell you guys about this movie that I tried to make back when I was like 16, is when I think I wrote it. And I'll give you a whole bunch of context into why I was doing this first. So, at the time, when I was a teenager, I got it in my head I wanted to direct movies. And I wanted to work in fiction for a long time. I've been trying to write a novel for a while, like ever since I was like 10. Like when I was 10, I tried to write a sequel to the video game that I wanted to make when it was starting to sink into me that like I couldn't really make a video game probably. And then I from there wrote a bunch of fan fictions. I wrote a bunch of short stories, and I tried to write a bunch of novels, but I never make it very far at all. And then at some point, I think it was just because I watched so much anime and watched so many movies, whereas I don't really read much, that I kind of realized that a lot of my ideas were just visual. Like a lot of the stuff I wanted to do was just to create aesthetic visuals. And this one idea I had was for a story where basically I sat down and I made a list of all the things I like in media, like all the tropes that I like, essentially. And I made a list of 52 different tropes, and I mix and matched them all over the place and created characters out of that. This is how Tales from the End of the World was created. If anybody's heard the audiobook of the novel I wrote when I was like 20 or however old. And I'll talk about that in another podcast probably, although there's already a ton of podcasting about that book, so maybe I'll leave it out, I don't know. But like, anyways, that's how I came up with that idea. But when I first had the idea, it was not meant to be a novel. It was, I was visualizing it as a movie. And that's because I wanted there to be a character who could like stop time. And I had this image in my head of like someone firing a bullet, and then the character stops time and like is walking around the bullet, or like picks it up and throws it at a character. I don't know, like something to do with time stopping in bullet time, and like spot coloring and shit. I just really wanted this one scene that I thought would look really cool. So I was trying to create a script that would start with that scene. But I never got very far with that. Like I would write out a couple pages over and over again. Like I wrote like probably 10 different versions of the beginning of that novel, or that screenplay, but it never got anywhere. And what I quickly realized is like, well, I can write this, but there's no way I could ever make it. Like I want to make a movie now. I want to try to get my foot in the door. And I followed a lot of filmmakers who had gotten their start just working by themselves. Like Quentin Tarantino is a great example of someone who sort of just was like writing scripts in his off time, when he was working at Blockbuster, and was like, sending these scripts around. Like he didn't come up through the studio system or anything. He was just a guy who, worked at a Blockbuster in Hollywood and met some celebrities, and like he got Harvey Keitel, I think, to like fund the movie based on the movie Reservoir Dogs, based on the script. I don't know how he got that connection exactly, but like I know that's what he did. And him and Robert Rodriguez were always talking about how you can become an indie filmmaker and how you need to just like pick up whatever you have and use that as your props in your set. Like whatever you have access to, use that to film. Quentin Tarantino had a thing where he said you should write every day of the week and film on weekends. Like just keep writing scripts all the time, and when you have time to film, you film some of the scripts you have, and that was a good way to practice. And I'd taken all this to heart. But I hated screenwriting, and I was too lazy to actually make anything. So, I really wanted to be a filmmaker, but I didn't understand this basic premise that I now say all the time, which is you cannot become an artist in a field where you don't enjoy the act of making the art, which is different from the product. You can't just enjoy the idea of having made a film. You have to enjoy making a film. You won't be a screenwriter if you don't like writing. You won't be a novelist if you don't like writing. You won't be anything if you don't like doing the thing you're doing. So, that's what I didn't understand at the time. And I thought I could become a filmmaker. So, there was one movie that I kind of borderline wrote. I won't say that it was a script or anything, but I wrote out like 10 pages of notes about it. And it was a complete, no, more than 10 pages, because I wrote it out scene by scene. Like, I had basically written like a scene number and what would happen in that scene for the entire film. And by my estimation, it would have been like 40 minutes long. It might have been shorter than that, honestly, if I'd actually tried to make it, because I always overestimate how long a like shot takes. But anyways, so here's the story of this film. Basically, the premise is that, well, actually, you know what? I'm just going to describe it in order and like see if you can figure it out what the message is for yourself. So the movie would have opened on me, the main character, sitting up in a bunk bed, and I would be giving a narration about how I was laying on Shade's bed writing, Shade being my little brother. And I would say that, like, you know, every day when I need to, or not every day, but like anytime I really need to think, like I really need to get away from my room and like think for my, like, you know, go somewhere for my head, I would climb up onto Shade's bed and write. This is all explained in the narration, but it's also true in real life. I wrote it while I was on Shade's bed. But the idea is I start off in Shade's bed and I'm giving this narration, and we sort of follow me through my daily life. And I am someone who basically holes up in my room, doesn't talk to anybody, and all I'm doing is like I'm trying to become a musician. Like, I've got a guitar, and occasionally you'll see me playing on it, but like, as stated in my narration, like I never really feel inspired, I never really want to do anything, and I just kind of lay around all the time. Meanwhile, in the background, we are being introduced to my family. You've got my dad, Shade, and Victor, my brothers. And then we've also got my cousin Boyd, who's sharing a room with me. Now, my mom doesn't show up in the movie till late, because in the context of this movie, my mom and dad are split up, and she lives somewhere else. It's important to the plot later. So, Boyd, my cousin, you know, lives in my room, and he seems like kind of an off-kilter guy. And I think I'm planning to do something with him, but mostly I'm just kind of lost in my own head. And the way this movie was going to be filmed, I really wanted the house that I lived in to be a character. Like, I wanted to show this house from every conceivable angle and have lots of wide angle shots inside the house so that you would always have a sense of where you are and just like understand this house like the back of your hand, you know, as a viewer by an early point in the film. I wanted you to know your way around. So there'd be lots of scenes of me like walking around and like, you know, just like having ennui. And there'd also be tons of music. Like, this would be a very montage driven film. So as it goes along, we start to notice as viewers that my cousin Boyd is acting a little weird in the background. And also that like people, like family members are disappearing. Like at some point Shade just Victor just stops showing up in the movie. And like my dad says something about it, like, "Hey, have you seen Vic?" And I'm just kind of like, "Nah," you know, and I walk off. Like, I don't seem to be paying attention to what's going on. And there'd be like a scene of me like jamming on a guitar, and it'd be playing like some epic music and shit, and like all this different kind of stuff, you know, very aesthetic movie that I'm going for here. But at some point, my friend Marcus would come over, and like he's supposed to be coming over to help me film something or something like that. And as he's walking up to the house, my cousin Boyd is waiting for him in the yard. And Boyd starts shoving him around. These two break out into a full-blown fight scene. Like, they have like a whole karate kung fu fight that goes into the woods outside my house, because I lived next to like a creek, you know, like a wooded creek. And so these two would go back into the creek, and they'd be having this whole fight scene. Boyd would eventually kill Marcus, and we'd be playing this trippy-ass music. I had the soundtrack I was going to use, I almost forgot this detail. There was this guy on the Mega Tokyo forums called, oh fuck, what the hell was his name? CD, um, god damn it, I don't remember. I don't remember the name of his fucking, I don't remember his name or his blog's name. It's been way too long, but I remember his band's name. He was this guy who, Cymbaline, that was his name. Cymbaline. He had a blog where he talked a lot about music and other stuff. It was a pretty well-written blog. He was not one of the more frequent updaters or anything, but I really liked his blog at the time. And he was like, I think he might have been like the moderator on the music board of Mega Tokyo forums. But I really enjoyed his blog, and he had a music section where he had all these songs that he made as Science of Shape. That was the name of his thing, and it was all like post-rock music and experimental shit. And I liked a lot of it, and I had asked him for permission to use it in a film, and he had said yes. So I was planning to score this entire film with Science of Shape music, so it'd be all this like crazy post-rock music, but there was this one song, the first track that he'd made, called Living Inside a Piano, which is just this really off-kilter, freakish nightmare song that I was going to play in the scene where Boyd kills Marcus. And I remember that was like a very specific song choice I had in mind. I think there was also a song I had in mind for like my guitar solo part, but I don't remember it. So Boyd kills Marcus, stuffs him in a bag, like cuts him up and stuffs him in a bag and throws him away. So now we know what's going on. My cousin Boyd is going around killing everybody, and I don't notice. I am just wrapped up in my own head, worried about making my music and trying to do my thing. Eventually, my dad disappears from the movie. We don't see like a kill scene or anything. He's just not there anymore in my everyday life, and I don't notice. So the climactic scene would be where my character, like after struggling for a while, finally finds this rush of inspiration, and he decides to run up to Shade's bed, to like go sit up on the bunk and think about it. Now, this would have been a trek all the way across my house, in the house I lived in. Like, so much of this movie was based around the like layout of my house and like what I could do with it and what stuff I had around. Now, even if I had filmed this movie, it would have been really, really, really bad because I had no idea how to use the professional grade camera that my dad had bought me. That he'd bought the family for Christmas because we said we wanted to be filmmakers and that we were really serious. And this movie was the only really serious project I had in mind, and I never worked on it. And nobody else ever seemed interested in helping me work on it, so I never did. I think I was really just kind of waiting for someone else. Like, I was constantly telling people, like, hey, you want to help me work on my movie? And, like, no one really showed interest, and that made me not want to do it anymore. But, I should have just done it myself. But, like, the set design would have been terrible. It would have just been a messy house and me pointing a camera at it, And most of the movie is fucking nothing. It's just me dicking around. And it probably would have only been, like, 10 minutes long when I thought it would be 40. But anyways, I go from my room and I run all the way across the house and up the stairs. Because in this house, I had a staircase that goes just to my room because I was in a room over the garage. And then there was also a staircase to the upstairs elsewhere in the house, a 2-story house. So I would run down my stairs, across the house, up the other stairs, and the music's swelling, and I've got all this inspiration. And I open the door to Shade's room, and the room is entirely covered in blood. And Boyd has Shade bent over his knee and is pulling his heart out of his chest. And there's like a moment of like dun dun dun, like freaking out, and then Boyd notices me, and I go sprinting off, and so he chases me down through the house and around, and then we run out. I run out the front door, and he's chasing me, and we run out into the road, and then he just gets fucking owned by a truck. And it turns out it's my mom. My mom was coming over to visit, and she was speeding in the neighborhood, I guess. And she hits Boyd, and he's dead. And turns out everybody I knew is dead, and I had no idea. So I go to live with my mom at the end, and I sort of realized that everything I was worried about was completely pointless. And that's sort of what the ending narration is. So yeah, I think the message of this movie is pretty blatantly obvious. I mean, it was pretty much just an autobiographical story with a horror twist. But I was basically criticizing myself for the fact that I'm so egotistical and self-centered, and I don't pay attention to the world around me because I'm so worried about my own shit that I wouldn't have even noticed if my family members were disappearing one by one, you know? Which would still have been true even recently when I lived at home, because, like, you know, sometimes someone would just not be around for, like, I'd find out like 2 days in that my dad was on a 4-day trip or something like that. You know, like, I would be like, oh, dad's not home? You know, what? He went on a trip? What are you talking about? So yeah, that was my movie that I really wanted to make. And I was really dead set on the fact that it had to be in that house. And I was like extremely resistant to moving out. Like, my family wanted to move into a bigger house, and one that was one story, because my mom had like bad knees and I was having difficulty going up and down stairs. And like, I just didn't understand at all why they wanted to leave that house, because I loved it so much, because I had a fucking great room. You know, I had a room over the garage, and I wanted to film my movie there. And like, I was so dead set on trying to film this movie in this house. I would have been, yeah, 16 going on 17, because I turned 17 right before we moved out. No. 17 going on 18. I turned 18 right after we moved out, because I graduated right before we moved out of that house. So, yeah, like, I would have been 17, and I really wanted to make this movie, and I really didn't want us to move. But as soon as we did move, it was just done. Like, there was no way that movie could ever be made, because, like, it was so particular to that house. You know, like, the run at the end wouldn't have made any sense in the new house or anything like that. And, man, I forgot that they still had bunk beds in that, like, up until then. Because we were always into loft beds in my family, like, whether it was bunk beds or just like a bed with a desk underneath it. Like, I had one of those, and that got passed down to my brothers. And so for like a really long time, there was always some kind of loft bed in our house. But it hasn't been that way in so long that I forgot. That's the craziest thing about being like 26, is when I actually think back to what things were like when I was 19, and enough has changed and been changed for long enough that I'm like, oh my god, I have gotten old.